Thanks a lot, Abdel, for that interesting presentation on how society is looking on nanos and perceive the trust of nanomaterials. This presentation that I'm going to give is going to take us more from the regulatory angle and how regulations are or are not improving trust. My name is Jenny Holmqvist, and I've been working with nanomaterials for over 10 years, both from industry point of view and now as part of ECHA, working on the implementation of REACH for nanomaterials together with many other colleagues. I will take these presentations from different angles, and the first one is that I want to take a step back. We have been working for nanos now for many years, and let's see what the developments have looked like. And then I want to take you a little bit through where we are now. We have now the revised REACH annexes, so how is it now looking like from our point of view? And I will also lay out a little bit what we see in the road ahead. So what are the challenges that we can see in front of us, and how are we in ECHA going to address those? And then I want to leave you with a little bit of key points and conclusions, and also come back to the title of the presentations, how regulations influence trust of nanomaterials. Like I said, nanomaterials have been something that has been discussed for a number of years. And on this slide, I have tried to develop or divide the timescale into 5 years. And this is for sure not an exhaustive list of achievements in the area of nanomaterials. It's just a couple of highlights. Nanomaterials started to really being discussed as a group of substances already before 2007, but maybe to put sort of a starting date on this discussion, and also for the sake of this slide and presentation, let's start there. So in around 2000, 2007, there we started to realize that nanomaterials may be different from the bulk materials. And bulk is put here in quotation mark, because normally we mean bulk materials as those that have coarser particle size, bigger particle size. And we also around that time, start to think about how can we define them? What are these groups of substances? What will be the criteria for defining them and also characterize them? And this led to the Commission recommendation for a definition, which is currently going through a review. We also start to think about the guidances. So we had the REACH guidance. It was still early days, but maybe they needed to be amended. So how will the existing REACH guidance, how should that be amended for nanomaterials? Also at the policy level, the Commission started a subgroup to the Caracal to specifically discuss nanomaterials. And that was more from a strategic and policy angle. And from more of an implementation angle, we formed a group to assess already registered nanomaterials, so post the first registration deadline. How did industry go about to demonstrate the safe use of those high volume substances that also contained nanoforms? From 2012 onwards, the first set of guidance was published. And also here in ECHA, we started with the nanomaterial expert group to discuss with member states, industry, NGOs on implementation related issues. The first substance evaluation cases was also published, which illustrated or which showcased that there were some legal uncertainties on how certain requirements should be implemented. This sparked the discussion on whether REACH should be amended for nanomaterials, if the annexes needed to be clarified further. And that discussion, as we know, took many years, and not until 2020, those revisions entered into force. But also the tools, not just the guidance, but the test guidelines were put under scrutiny. Were they actually applicable for these materials? And if not, which ones should be amended and adapted? This work was further underpinned by the huge efforts at OECD level in relation to the sponsorship program, where a number of nanomaterials were tested just to see how the test guidelines were working for these groups of substances. In later years, we have continued in ECHA to update the guidances. We have also seen how the research projects that has started long before 2017, how the outcome of those research projects have helped us to inform us better on partly how the guidance should be formed or developed, but also the test guidelines. And as we know, as I already said, in 2020, the revised annexes came into force. And let me pause on that with the next slide, just to give you a better feeling on, or an understanding of, what those changes were. So first of all, the general provisions were that all new and existing registrations that consisted of nanoform or had the nanoforms within the scope needed to be updated to be complying with the new information requirements. And those also applied to all nanoforms above 1 tonnage, or where the total volume of the substance exceeded 1 tonnage. And also the chemical safety report, which is where industry demonstrates the safe use of nanos, has to include an assessment also of the nanoforms for the exposure and for the risk. And the new amendments to the annexes also pointed towards that downstream users who may modify the nanoforms or the particles need to have an increased awareness of what that modification may mean in terms of risk, and also then potentially either communicate it upstream or perform a downstream user chemical safety report. In the more sort of specific technical part of the annexes relating to the information requirements, there were also a number of new obligations or requirements for companies relating to characterizations in Annex 6, where certain parameters were added for nanoforms, and also that the new amendments of Annex 6 gave registrants an opportunity to form sets of nanoforms where the conditions were met in terms of boundaries, and also in terms of that the set itself needed to have the same risk and exposure assessment. But there was in particularly new information requirements that related to tox and ecotox specifically for nanoforms. So what are we doing with these new annexes? Well, in terms of compliance checks, we have very much followed the normal way of dealing with substances, where we see specifically for nanomaterials, more like a two-step rocket, if you like. So the first one is really to clarify what I said here about the characterization, that the sets have clear boundaries, and that there is this robust justification for hazard exposure and risk assessments. And then as a second step, when this is completed and we have really a good understanding of the Annex 6 requirements, then to go on to assess also the information requirements. And this is in line with normal compliance check for other substances as well, where the substance ID is really the starting point, and so also for nanoforms. We have also risk management initiatives that have moved on throughout these years. So tattoo inks, which is based on classification and labeling properties or hazard properties, where we know that many pigments also consist of nanoforms. We also have a recent restriction proposal relating to microplastics, where the issue around the methods, the lacking or the challenges that we see with actually measuring these nanoparticles or nanoplastic, as it is in this case, that was concerns that was brought up in the process of developing this restriction for microplastics. So again, this is the theme that comes throughout the work that we do, and also that we see from companies that they also bring up, some companies bring up as concern in complying. But we have tried, as I said on my first slide, continuously to provide support for companies. We actually this year published a new practical guide for how to prepare registration for nanoforms. We have also updates underway for both human health and also for environmental endpoints, and also for registration of nanoforms, based on the experience that we have seen from companies since January 2020. We also continuously, as the need arises, creates webinars, and we also have over the years had several activities where we try to support also different industry sectors, because they sometimes are different and the needs of those are then better covered by bilateral discussions. And these webinars are also still accessible on our websites. And with those webinars that we have had, there is also an extensive Q&As that has been developed afterwards to really try to answer the challenges and questions that industry has. So where are we now? So by the 1st of September this year, we have updated registrations for 130 substances. And we know that this is lower than we anticipated. And in communication with member states and industry, we have indicated that we believe that there are around 300 substances on the EU market. And this is an estimate that we have made, but we have also not made it out of thin air. So we have assessed the other legislations that we have at the EU level, such as cosmetic directive. We have also tried to use the national inventories that certain member states have to gain a better understanding of what we can expect. And this leads us to some assumptions. So we still think that there are companies that may still not be aware of these new obligations that are in place under REACH. We have tried to awareness raising campaigns, letter campaigns to reach these companies, but the few number that we have currently, the 130 substances, points towards that maybe there is still work to be done there. There is also a lack of the nano-specific data that we hope should be regenerated through the test methods. And we see that registrants very often use alternative methods. And although alternative methods are extremely useful and valuable, they should never compromise on the quality of data. And in the context of nanos, if we assume, wrong or right, that the hazard of the nanoforms are always the same as the bulk, there could be a risk of missing out on important information and data by doing that kind of read across. And there we think that maybe some of the alternative methods, such as read across, could be questionable in this case. And then also, as I said, also throughout this presentation, we do see that there is a lack of sometimes certain test methods, and the registrant express concerns about not knowing if a certain test method is applicable. And this again could potentially lead to that certain data generation is simply not happening because of this assumption. So the road ahead for us, well, this is an excellent opportunity for us to also remind those who attend this conference that companies must submit registration with the data as outlined in REACH to demonstrate safe use of nanoforms. This is now in REACH itself, and we hope that this is also part of awareness raising and that we can see this number going up over time. We also see that there is a need to continue to support companies, and this is also what we have in front of us through updating of guidances to support the work at OECD level in revising some of the test methods to make sure that the tools and guidance are available to help companies to comply with information requirements in REACH. We also think that using the nanomaterial expert group could potentially give us a unique opportunity to align our regulatory approaches with member states and also allow for discussions with industry on these challenges that they are currently facing. And again, there is continued effort needed also to raise the awareness among companies that these regulations or requirements are currently there and also how to meet them in the best way. So I want to now just finalize my presentation by giving you a couple of key points and also come back to the title of the presentation. So if we go back to the tricky question of this presentation, can regulation improve trusting in nanomaterials? Well, trust is a vague term and is complex. It's influenced by many more factors than we have available in time to discuss today, like, for example, the benefit of using certain products, and also very much personal perception of willingness to take risks or whatever. So it's a very complex term. If we, for the sake of this, just look at it from an ECHA perspective and from a REACH perspective, it's true that REACH has its main objective to ensure that chemicals and nanoforms can be safely used on the EU market. In order to achieve this objective, industry has to comply with the information requirement, compile or demonstrate the safe use in their chemical safety report that has to be submitted to ECHA and which can later be checked as part of compliance. And actually, regulations act as a lock and key with compliance and enforcement. So perhaps it's more a question of perceived trust that because something is regulated, then it is also compliant with the regulation's objectives. In this case, something that is under REACH is assumed safe because REACH is there to do exactly that. What REACH is also doing, which is important for trust, is that REACH contributes to transparency. REACH ensures that information that is submitted by registrants is also shared via our website, but also shared between in the supply chain, that companies comes together in their supply chain to ensure that the information that eventually is there to ensure the safety is also communicated on in the supply chain as a whole. And thereby also the consumers have an easy access to this information. So regulations indeed do contribute to creating trust. If I now just finalize with some key points and conclusion, I just want to stress here as a first point that nano is not a done issue. Done in the sense that now we have the information requirements in REACH, so now everything is working. I think through this presentation I illustrated that there is still more work needed to be done. There is still more awareness raising there. The guidance is still not necessarily all complete and a continuous development. And also that certain test methods are still needing to be checked and reviewed and are actually going through that process right now. So there is still work to be done. And also that the perception that the REACH annexes will generate nanospecific data might also be hampered by the miles we still need to go. And the fact that we don't necessarily have all the nanospecific data at our fingertips as regulators, it could potentially actually hamper our regulatory decision making. And finally, as we saw, regulation and trust is also demanding other aspects, and we all need to play our role. Us as regulators, member states, also regulators, industry and NGOs, we all have a part to play in ensuring that trust in the regulations and those substances that is falls within the scope of, for example, REACH, are fulfilling the objective of the legislation. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to any questions from all of you.